You wouldn't believe how heavily a lot of your favorite anime were edited and censored before they aired in America. For a lot of them, they almost feel like completely different shows because, well, when you think about it, sometimes they kind of are. Let's take a look at some of the most famous examples of anime being edited or censored before airing in America. Just try not to have your mind blown. Pokémon is a prime example of an anime that underwent significant changes when making the jump to America to make it more kid-friendly. Some were done for pretty obvious reasons, like taking out anything sexual relating to Misty, but others are just straight up baffling. Apparently, for kids, the producing studio behind the English dub didn't know what rice was. Either that or they were just too lazy to care. Our money's on the latter, and it makes the episode where Brock and the team call food that's clearly meant to be rice balls jelly donuts over and over again almost laughably bad upon rewatching. They don't even attempt to reanimate the scenes with actual jelly donuts in the characters' hands. You know that one place you go when you die, when you've really been bad? That's right, it's the home for infinite losers. At least that's what Dragon Ball Z wants you to think. The popular anime has seen a lot of changes when it was adapted over to America, including things like significantly cutting down the violence and blood from its epic fights. Even though there were a lot of alterations and edits, perhaps the most humorous and memorable change is Goku falling off of Snake Way and landing in an extremely watered-down version of Hell. Instead of Hell, the show changed its name to Hiffle instead, an abbreviation for Home for Infinite Losers, which, let's be honest, sounds like a much worse place to go. It's hard to imagine Yu-Gi-Oh! Without thinking of the dreaded Shadow Realm, the dark dimension where souls could be sent for all of eternity. But surprisingly, the entire concept of the Shadow Realm was made up for the English dub of the card-playing anime to replace the instances where anyone, died for real. It was a way to make the show a little more digestible for young kids, and it was just one of the many ways Yu-Gi-Oh! Was changed from its darker, more mature roots. Some of these changes were more noticeable than others. How can we forget the time Kaiba was confronted by two bad guys who threateningly pointed their fingers at him, forcing Kaiba to jump out of a window? Well, it was a little different in the original version, which had the men have actual guns rather than just their fingers. But it's pretty hilarious to think that Kaiba risked almost certain death to escape a threatening finger point. An entire video could be made revolving around the many censorship changes the popular and long-running classic One Piece anime went through in its transition over to America, oftentimes to hilarious results. Some great examples include Full Body, the grape juice expert who tries to impress everybody with his ability to tell the year and vineyard a particular bottle of expensive grape juice came from, Sanji's crippling lollipop addiction, and the baffling decision to replace almost every dangerous weapon into something outlandish and silly, like using a shovel as a gun, or having the Navy use what appeared to be water guns instead of actual weapons. They seem to want to avoid any sort of potential backlash or complaints, and the English dub even went as far as changing darker skin tones to lighter ones, to avoid any potential claims of racism in its depiction of certain characters. Which, if you look at the original, was probably the best move. Sailor Moon remains one of the most popular anime of all time, thanks in no small part to its strong, likable female lead characters, and for its believable portrayal of female friendship. Sure, the fights are pretty cool, but nothing beats moments like Sailor Moon bantering back and forth with Sailor Mars. The show also earned a lot of popularity and respect for its handling of the relationship between Sailor Neptune and Sailor Uranus. But that relationship was considered a big red flag to American producers, so they went ahead and changed things up for the English dub. Instead of having them as lovers, the English dub suggested that Sailor Neptune and Sailor Uranus were actually just cousins who were super close with each other. In Cardcaptor Sakura, the 10-year-old Sakura discovers a book that, when opened, releases a series of magical cards out in the world, and must find a way to collect them all. It's a straightforward story, but you wouldn't necessarily understand that from the English dub. In an effort to make the show more appealing to boys, the English version changed the name to just Cardcaptors, and then proceeded to air the episodes out of order to focus more on the ensemble cast rather than just the main character Sakura. The very first episode aired in America was number 8 in Japan. If that wasn't bad enough, the American version proceeded to cut out all references and examples of LGBT relationships in the show, and changed them to just close, friendly relationships. Say that Ghost Stories was changed for American audiences is perhaps the biggest understatement of all time. It's actually a funny story. The original, serious anime was about a group of kids fighting ghosts, but it was a major flop in Japan. They gave the dubbing rights over to ADV Films, and although there were a few stipulations, the dubbing company was given almost complete creative freedom and were allowed to do whatever they wanted. Deciding to have fun with it, ADV Films let their voice cast ad-lib and goof around for a whole lot of their lines. Meaning the once serious anime basically turned into a parody of itself, with offensive, politically incorrect characters who weren't afraid to insult their own animation style, or even criticize the anime cliches in their own story. Remember how Shadow the Hedgehog was all moody and edgy in Sonic X? Well, maybe there was a better reason than what you originally expected. In the original version of the show, Shadow was a government experiment, created on the space colony Ark. It was there that the Sonic doppelganger befriended young Maria Robotnik, and the two became close. It wasn't long before GUN troops stormed the Ark with the intent to shut the whole place down. In the scuffle, Maria helped Shadow enter an escape pod, but was shot and killed by a soldier while making sure Shadow escaped. The event traumatized Shadow and gave him motivation for his actions later in the series. But the English version significantly altered those events by having Maria simply captured and, never heard from again. Tokyo Mew Mew is another example of an anime getting an almost total transformation before airing in America. First thing that had to go was the name. Tokyo Mew Mew was replaced with Mew Mew Power, presumably because kids in America probably couldn't tell you where Tokyo was on a map. The standard Americanized process kept moving forward with all Japanese text removed from the show, and the music getting a complete overhaul. Besides additional changes like body lines being removed to get rid of any indication of nudity, Cartoon Channel for Kids aired the episodes in a different order so that they could get the whole cast together faster. This caused plot lines to fall through, and character beats to ultimately fail. Shaman King follows a shaman named Yo, who can let spirits possess him in exchange for using their powers. Yo is trying to become the Shaman King by winning the pretty simplistically named Shaman Fight, which is exactly what you'd expect it to be. When it came to changes for the English dub, 4Kids was in an interesting situation. How do you change up and censor all references of death and violence when those concepts are so important to the overall plot? The answer is, they couldn't. Sure, the excess blood in the show was never going to be okay, so they changed that from red to black. Cigarettes were removed and all examples of religious symbolism like crosses were ditched. But overall, they tried to keep the show intact. It didn't work, as many parents complained about the show's violence level and message, which makes you wonder why they even bothered to censor and edit it at all. We've been spending a lot of time here decrying English dubs for changing the original anime into something unrecognizable, but not every original version deserves a faithful adaptation. Angel Cop is one of those examples. To be honest, we're not entirely convinced Angel Cop is a real anime, but rather some type of gritty 80s fever dream hallucination. It's excessively bloody, violent, and cheesy. The plot itself is actually pretty horrendous and blatantly racist, having Jewish bankers plotting to turn Japan into a nuclear waste dump. How do you dub something like that? Well, for starters, you make every character cuss like a sailor, and change the lines to make them a weird mix of logical and head-scratching. The English dub of Smile Precure seems to want to erase everything having to do with Smile Precure. It changed the name completely to Glitter Force, and contrary to the title, it doesn't involve the main magical girls using glitter guns to destroy their enemy. But likewise changed the names of all the main characters to more American-friendly names, the English dub also removed a solid chunk of episodes that were either too heavy for a children's show, like the disappearance of one girl's father, or had too much of an emphasis on Japanese culture. For example, episode 10 was removed completely, not because of a major plot problem, but because the episode focused a lot on okonomiyaki, which is described as a Japanese savory pancake with a bunch of different ingredients. Thinking it was too much of a headache to try to explain that to American audiences, they cut the whole episode out. We should all be thanking Astro Boy for its influence on what anime has become today. The landmark series was first adapted in 1963, and it was so beloved at the time, it laid the groundwork for anime to become so popular today. But even one of the original anime in Japan still faced censorship and edits when brought over to the States. The worst to suffer from these edits might have been Uran, aka Astro Girl. Producers changed her name to Astro Girl even though it made no sense, so they could try to market a female superhero, and they even aired an episode out of order, introducing Astro Girl before her actual debut episode. Astro Boy has been adapted a few more times in different anime, and all of them mostly underwent the same sort of censorship and editing that the original went through as well. No matter what country you're in, it seems that young boys will always want to sneak a peek at the opposite sex. In the anime Yokai Watch, the main character Nate and his friends have a sleepover, and they get excited over a provocative ad they see on television. In the original version, girls in bikinis and cat ears cheer at them from the television screen, causing the young boys to understandably lose their minds. In the censored version, the bikinis become one-piece swimsuits. The boys' excitement is barely there, and the girls on the television screen even shout, "Good, clean fun!" just to prove that this isn't anything naughty at all. When you think of talking hamsters going on big adventures, it's hard to imagine anything particularly dark or mature about that. But sure enough, even the kids' classic Hamtaro had a number of big issues that were changed or cut out when it made the jump to American culture. They ranged from small, partially violent things like cutting out a scene where Howdy attempts to shoot Snoozer with a cork gun that looks awfully like the real thing, or Howdy hitting Dexter on the head with a toy hammer. If that was the worst of it, it wouldn't be that bad, but there's one really heavy scene that definitely had to be nixed. It involved Laura's father coming home drunk and arguing with her mother. Obviously, this had to be changed. Sometimes the worst censorship or editing changes can lead to a positive result. Let's take a look at Nasei of the Valley of the Wind, a movie from the legendary Hayao Miyazaki, mastermind behind classics like My Neighbor Totoro, Kiki's Delivery Service, Princess Mononoke, and Spirited Away. It's safe to say that this guy knows how to make a good anime movie, but apparently the American studio responsible for adapting it didn't think so. They ended up cutting close to a quarter of the movie out, because they thought it was too slow-moving and poorly paced, and they didn't bother to tell the actors what the story was about, so most of them didn't know what they were doing. There's a whole lot of life lessons that the Doraemon anime tries to bestow on viewers. It shows how gadgets can be used to solve any problem, why you should obviously be a cat person instead of a dog person, and why you should always eat a well-balanced and healthy meal. That last part is pretty interesting. While most anime or English shows don't tend to care about sugary sweets, Doraemon goes out of its way in its English adaptation to replace the candy and sweets the characters eat with fresh fruit instead. This was done as a way to promote healthy eating, but we think it turned this into a horror anime. Nobody wants fruit for dessert, Doraemon! This wasn't their only change to food-related items either. The show also decided to replace all instances of chopsticks with forks and knives instead. Out of all the Gundam series, the one with perhaps the most notable changes for American audiences is the 6th installment, Mobile Suit Gundam Wing. Or just Gundam Wing if you want to be cool. It follows a war in the future between Earth and its orbital colonies. It includes all the robot smashing we've come to love and admire from the Gundam series. When this version was brought over to Toonami, it was a bit of a surprise given the amount of violence in it. But Cartoon Network did its best to preserve its story and characters without chopping it up too much. Of course, violence had to be toned down, but the biggest change was cutting out all the words relating to death and replacing it with something else. For example, "I'll kill you" was changed to "I'll destroy you." We don't know about you, but destroy sounds a lot worse. Saint Seiya underwent a lot of radical changes in its English dub. Probably most notably, it changed the name completely from Saint Seiya to Knights of the Zodiac, which we got to admit is a better name, but the English dub was definitely more Americanized. And the biggest way to prove that is by saying the 100% true statement that the opening for the English dub is a cover of "I Ran" by a Flock of Seagulls. If that's not just a totally American thing, then we don't know what it is. The English version also had to edit all the blood by either getting rid of it or coloring it blue. Because, when blue liquid starts flowing out of a human, we're not alarmed in the slightest. It also cut away any excessive instances of death. Instead of killing their opponents, the Knights just sent the bad guys away to prison, without ever hearing from them ever again. There's been a handful of Digimon series since the 90s, and although proven quite popular in America, almost all of them had some instances that had to be changed or edited before airing in the United States. A lot of them were subtle, like cutting religious elements, but a majority of the gun violence had to be cut as well for obvious reasons. That proved to be difficult for certain Digimon in other versions of the show, especially Gargamon, who's like a cute little bunny that decided to suddenly get jacked and replace his hands with machine guns. That's pretty hard to edit around, but the show did what they could, making Gargamon rarely hit his targets as he sprays his Gatling arm around like an absolute madman. There was also instances of a young grade schooler saying she wanted to be a model named Sexy Dynamite, but obviously that had to go too. And those were some of the times anime was changed for America. Are you shocked by any of these changes? Are there others that we should be aware of? Be sure to leave a comment below letting us know your thoughts, and don't forget to subscribe to CBR for more awesome anime content. Thanks for watching.